back to Teach Me the Bible Stories with Miss Michelle. Today we will look at 1 Samuel 18 through 23, where King Saul goes crazy with envy, and Saul's son Jonathan demonstrates great humility and love. There will be 10 questions at the end. You can earn 100 points, but first, the books of the Bible. There are 12 books of minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah. Now for Obadiah, we're using the ASL sign for consequence, because Obadiah prophesied against Edom that they would suffer the consequence for committing violence against Israel. Now Edom, or the Edomites, were the descendants of Esau, aka Edom. Just like Israel, or the Israelites, were the descendants of Jacob, aka Israel. Now remember, Jacob and Esau were twin brothers, so we're talking about their descendants. But Edom did not treat Israel like family. In fact, when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they stole, captured, and even killed Israelites. Obadiah prophesied against Edom, saying, "Your pride has deceived you, and because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be destroyed forever." Obadiah prophesied, "Your deeds will return upon your head." You see, they would receive the consequence for their actions. But then Obadiah says that all nations will suffer the consequence for their pride and evil ways. The shortest book in the Old Testament ends with a reminder that one day the Lord will establish his kingdom here on earth. And of course, that's pointing to Jesus. So there are 12 books of minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah. Okay, are you ready for today's Bible story? Listen carefully. This story is from the Bible, God's holy word. After David killed Goliath, Saul sent David on numerous military missions, and David was always successful. When the men returned home from battling the Philistines, the women came out and sang. And they sang, "Saul has slain thousands, and David tens of thousands." Well, Saul was angry when he heard that. He said, "They have credited David with tens of thousands, but me with only thousands." He did not like David receiving more honor. Saul was envious. Okay, what did the women sing? Saul has killed thousands, and David how many? Tens of thousands. And why did that make Saul so angry? He did not like David receiving more honor. He was envious. Well, the next day, an evil spirit came on Saul, so David played the harp for him. Well, in the past, David's harp playing would calm Saul down. But this time, Saul hurled his spear at David in an attempt to kill him. David thankfully moved faster than Saul's spear. Saul attempted to kill David with that spear a second time, but once again, David moved just in time. You see, Saul was afraid of David. He could see the Lord was with David, but no longer with him. And Saul's envy was making him act crazy. Saul then came up with another plan to have David killed. He thought he could get the Philistines to kill him. So Saul put David in charge of 1,000 soldiers and sent him off to battle. But David had success wherever he went because the Lord was with David. When Saul saw how successful David was, it just made him more envious. Okay, what did Saul do in his first 2 attempts to kill David? He threw his spear at him while David played the harp. And Saul sent David off to battle the Philistines, hoping the Philistines would kill him. How did Saul feel when David kept coming back successful? Even more envious. You know, jealousy and envy are very dangerous. James 3:16 warns, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice." Saul had envy for David, and he certainly had selfish ambition. He wanted to be number one and to receive the most honor. Now, David didn't care about being number one or receiving honor, but because the Lord was with David and kept giving him success, David kept receiving honor. Now listen to James 3:16 again. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. Saul definitely was causing disorder by trying to kill David. Saul should have repented from his envy and selfishness, but instead he continued in it. And we will see that Saul's envy and selfish ambition will lead Saul to more and more evil ways. Okay, what is James 3:16? For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every what? Every evil practice. In other words, it leads to worse sins. Well, Saul told David he could have his oldest daughter as a wife if he killed more Philistines. Again, Saul hoped the Philistines would kill David in battle. When Saul's plan didn't work, Saul gave his oldest daughter to another man. But then Saul learned that his youngest daughter, Michal, was in love with David. So he told David he could marry Michal if he defeated more Philistines in battle. So David killed 200 Philistines so that he could marry Michal. Saul, of course, was not happy that David came back successful, but he let David marry his youngest daughter, Michal, anyway. Okay, which of Saul's daughters did Saul first offer to let him marry if he killed Philistines? Saul's oldest daughter. When David was successful, did Saul do as he promised? No, he gave his oldest daughter to another man. Well, after David killed 200 more Philistines, who did Saul let David marry? Saul's youngest daughter, Michal. Saul then came up with another plan to get rid of David. Saul told his son Jonathan and his attendants to kill David. Now, Jonathan loved David, so he warned him and told him to go into hiding. After a talk with his dad, Jonathan thought he had successfully convinced Saul to no longer be angry at David. So Jonathan had David return. But once again, an evil spirit came on Saul, and Saul threw his spear at David while David played the harp. Now that was the third time that Saul threw his spear at David. Thankfully, David eluded Saul's spear again. Saul then sent men to David's house to kill him, but his wife Michal warned him, and David escaped just in time. David went to the prophet Samuel and told him all that Saul had done to him. Okay, how many times altogether did Saul throw his spear at David? 3 times. And when Saul sent men to David's house to kill him, who warned David? David's wife Michal, who's also Saul's daughter. Now, who did David go see after he escaped? The prophet Samuel. Well, after some time, Jonathan snuck off while his father was unaware and met up with David. Jonathan told David that he thought his father's temper had settled down, but David was not convinced. So Jonathan and David devised a plan so that Jonathan could warn David if it became clear Saul still wanted to kill David. Before Jonathan left, he made a covenant with David to do all he could to protect and save him. Now, it wasn't long, though, before Jonathan learned that Saul still wanted to kill David. So Jonathan followed through with that plan they had made. Jonathan shot arrows in a field and had a boy go retrieve those arrows. Jonathan knew David was hiding nearby. So when the boy was searching for one of the arrows, Jonathan yelled, "Isn't the arrow beyond you? Hurry! Go quickly! Don't stop!" The boy thought Jonathan was talking to him, but the message was a warning to David to run away and escape King Saul. Jonathan gave the arrows to the boy and told him to return home. When David saw no one was there but Jonathan, David came out of hiding and bowed before Jonathan. Jonathan and David wept together because they knew this might be the last time they would ever see each other. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have a sworn friendship with each other and between your descendants and my descendants forever." So here we learn that the covenant agreement between Jonathan and David wasn't just to protect each other, but to protect each other's children and descendants. Okay, Jonathan shot arrows in a field and yelled to the boy, "Isn't the arrow beyond you? Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." What was Jonathan relaying to David? What was the message for David? That David needed to run away and escape King Saul. Okay, Jonathan and David made a covenant with each other to protect each other and to protect who else? Their children and descendants. Now I want you to remember that for a future lesson coming up. David escaped Saul and went to Nob, where Ahimelech the priest was. David told Ahimelech that he was on a secret mission for King Saul, and then he asked him for food and a sword. And of course Ahimelech the priest helped David because he knew that David was on a secret mission for King Saul. So Ahimelech the priest gave David bread and Goliath's sword, the one David used to kill Goliath. Well, Saul's head shepherd named Doeg was there that day, and Doeg saw Ahimelech give David the bread and Goliath's sword. David then left and went to the Philistine city of Gath. When David got there, servants of King Achish brought David to King Achish and warned him that David was the one the Israelites sing about, saying, "Saul has slain thousands and David tens of thousands." David thought he better do something because that song is about him killing Philistines, and King Achish is a Philistine. So David pretended to be insane, and he let saliva run down his face and everything. Now David must have been a good actor because King Achish was convinced enough to order insane David out of his house. And as soon as David made it out, he escaped unharmed. Okay, what did Ahimelech the priest give David? Bread and Goliath's sword. And David escaped to the Philistine city of Gath. The king's servants knew that the Israelites sang, what about David? Saul has slain thousands, and David how many? Tens of thousands. And what did David do so that King Achish wouldn't want to kill him? He pretended to be insane. Well, David escaped to a cave in Adullam. David's parents, brothers, and a total of 400 men joined David there. Many of the 400 men ran away from Israel because they were in debt or were in some type of trouble. Well, David welcomed them all and became their leader. When Doeg learned that Saul was looking for David, Doeg told Saul that Ahimelech the priest had given David food and Goliath's sword. Well, that made Saul furious. He then ordered Ahimelech the priest to be killed. But the king's officials were not willing to kill the priest. But Doeg the Edomite was. He was willing to kill Ahimelech. And so Doeg killed Ahimelech. But if that weren't bad enough, Saul also killed 85 other priests and others who lived in the town of Nob. Saul's heart was so filled with envy and hate that he killed that many people. Now, one of Ahimelech's sons escaped and ran to David. He told David what Saul had done to his father and to the others. David said, "I am responsible for the death of your father and your family." David urged him to stay with him and promised to protect him. Okay, when Doeg told Saul that Ahimelech the priest gave David bread and Goliath's sword, who did Saul order to be killed? Ahimelech the priest. And who escaped to tell David what Saul had done? One of Ahimelech's sons. Well, Saul continued to pursue David, but David was wise enough to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord told David where to escape Saul. Now, Jonathan was able to find David, though. And Jonathan helped David find strength in God. Jonathan said, Don't be afraid. My father will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you." You see, Jonathan, as the king's son, would be expected to be the next king. But Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. So he was not envious of David. And because he recognized that God was with David, Jonathan told him that he knew he would be king over Israel and would be above him. Now that is humility. Jonathan and Saul could not be more opposite. Saul demonstrated envy, selfish ambition, and acts of great sin. Jonathan demonstrated humility, love, and acts of great kindness. After giving those encouraging words, Jonathan returned back to Jerusalem, and David and the men with him continued to run from Saul. Saul received information about David's location, and just as Saul was getting very close, Saul received word that the Philistines were raiding the land. So Saul had to give up his pursuit of David in order to fight off the Philistines. The Lord had protected David once again. Okay, who told David where to go to escape Saul? The Lord. And who did Jonathan tell David would be king one day? Jonathan said David would be king one day, even though Jonathan was the son of the king. Okay, who demonstrated envy, selfish ambition, and acts of great sin? Saul. And who demonstrated humility, love, and acts of great kindness? Jonathan. Okay, just as Saul was getting very close to finding David, Saul received word that what was happening? That the Philistines were raiding the land. So Saul had to leave to fight off the Philistines. The Lord had protected David once again. Okay, are you ready for your 10 questions? Just hit the pause button if you need a little bit more time after each question. Question 1. What did the women sing? Saul has killed thousands and David how many? Time, tens of thousands. Question 2. What did Saul do in his first 2 attempts to kill David? I'll give you a hint. David was playing the harp. What did Saul do? Time, he threw his spear at David. Number 3. Saul sent David off to battle the Philistines, hoping the Philistines would kill David. How did Saul feel when David kept coming back successful? Time, even more envious. Number 4. How many times altogether did Saul throw a spear at David? Time, 3 times. Okay, number 5. When Saul sent men to David's house to kill him, who warned David? Time, Michal, David's wife Michal, or Saul's daughter Michal, same person. Number 6. Jonathan and David made a covenant with each other to protect each other and to protect who else? Time, their children and descendants. Number 7. What did Ahimelech the priest give to David? It was 2 things. What did Ahimelech the priest give to David? Time, bread, and Goliath's sword. Number 8. When Doeg told Saul that Ahimelech the priest gave David bread and Goliath's sword, who did Saul order to be killed? Time, Ahimelech the priest. Number 9. Who did Jonathan tell David would be king one day? Time, David. Okay, the last question, question 10, has 2 parts. So you have to get both of them right to get a point. Okay, the first part. Who demonstrated envy, selfish ambition, and acts of great sin? Time, Saul. Part 2. Who demonstrated humility, love, and acts of great kindness? Time, Jonathan. Okay, how many did you get right? Now multiply that by 10 and that's your score. Now I have 2 assignments for you. I want you to go read 1 Samuel chapter 18 and read chapter 23. Then go tell someone what you learned today. Come back for our next video in our Teach Me the Bible Story series. See you next time.